give a book. I recently rewatched one of my favorite movies. I'm already gonna get. I know I'm gonna get crap for this already. So it's a movie I really enjoy. I don't know if I'd put it on a top 10 list, maybe top 15, and it'd probably float right around like 14 or 13 or something like that. It's a horror movie, and it's called Jeepers Creepers.
I haven't seen a car in 50 miles.
You know what I just thought of, right?
Kenny and Darla.
You believe that story?
That they did go looking for her head.
They only found the car.
They never found her head.
Now, for those who don't know what Jeepers Creepers is, it's basically the story is about a brother and sister. They're driving cross country in this wicked old car for college break, spring break. They start being pursued and tailgated by this giant, monstrous truck. And it's like, you know, running down on them and trying to run them off the road. It's scary shit. And then you find out that there's an actual demon, a winged demon that's driving the truck, and he's trying to find pieces of people to put himself back together. So he needs, you know, new eyeballs, new teeth, new hands, stuff like that. And he happens to come across this brother and sister, and then they kind of uncover his lair, and it's a big thing. There's a lot of people who hate the movie. It had a very like cult following, and then the sequels just got worse. But that opening scene of them driving the car, and then, you know, this giant truck coming up behind them. I mean, that first half of that movie, the truck is the monster. Like, the truck is the demon. The truck is the thing that's trying to kill everything, you know? And as an audience member, we're also left in the dark along with the actors until we find out they actually come across him, and he's like picking somebody apart or something, or I can't remember exactly what. That first half of the movie, because it's like 35 minutes. Like, we don't actually see the monster until past the halfway point, I think. You know, again, you don't know what it is. You just, all it is just this crazy truck. And I like that scene so much, in fact, that I'm going to outright steal it and then see where I can do with it after that. I am literally going to steal the scene from that movie and turn it into a story. This is #Flash Fiction. It's a show about writing in real time. I'm your host, Eric M. Hunter, and I have been writing stories since I was a child. There's a million ways to start a story, and you never know how it's going to turn out. It could be really good, or it could be really bad. Let's see what happens. See, the thing I like so much about this scene is that there's so much unknown going on. You know, as a viewer, we're trying to piece together what these two characters are doing, why they're together. You know, we find out really early on that they're brother and sister, and then they fight like brother and sister. They even come across some like other cars on the road that have funny license plates, and that ends up being a thing too, because the demon's truck has a funky license plate. It's like bee eating you, or bee something dumb like that. You would think for a movie that I enjoyed so much that I watched, I don't know, like 3 or 4 days ago, I'd remember more of it. Shows you how good my memory is. That's why you got to write everything down, people. Any idea you come up with, like, I would be lost if it wasn't for Evernote and like the Notes app on my phone, because anytime I come up with an idea, like, I stop everything and write it down, because I know for a fact that if I don't do it right then and there, I'm going to completely forget about it until whatever thing that sparked my creativity in that moment comes back again. And that's rare. It's super rare when that stuff happens. So write things down. Evernote, the Notes app, Google Keep's really nice. Just anything, in my opinion. Shoot, take a notebook with you. I used to carry around a little spiral notebook in my back pocket. Anytime I came up with an idea, I'd write it down. You know, like, it was just one of those things. My memory's been shot since I was a kid. So anything I can take advantage of to remember something, I take advantage of it. So that's definitely writing stuff down. As an audience member, we're still trying to learn who these characters are. We get to learn their mannerisms and like what they feel about certain issues and stuff. And then all of that is completely destroyed because of this giant truck, because they are now in danger. Like, this thing is literally trying to ram them and run them off the road. It is like a literal ride. Like, it's a roller coaster. Like, everything up to that point, you know, we're waiting in line. We're overhearing conversations of other people who are waiting in line. You know, if you're with somebody who's waiting in line as well, you talk to them about run-of-the-mill things, just a regular everyday, like, it's kind of a boring conversation. And then suddenly, wham, like, this thing comes, and now you are purely reacting, like there is no strategy. You are moving only because this thing behind you or in front of you or whatever is forcing you to move. And I love that. Like that scene makes that movie. I mean, there's a lot of other good stuff in that movie and there's a lot of dumb stuff in that movie. But that is the thing I feel like really draws you in. One thing you'll hear over and over again is like, if you can't grip somebody in the first 10 pages of your book or the first however many 1,000 words, they're not going to keep reading. Like usually when I read a book, I typically give a book 100 pages. If I can't get past 100 pages without thinking like, oh my God, I don't want to read this anymore, I put the book down. I know people who only do 50 pages. I know people who do a chapter, like that roping the reader in at the very beginning is like super important, and concentrating on that is also pretty important. The other thing that I hear all the time is to lose your first chapter. Because again, typically when you start writing, let's just say a novel, your first draft is always the worst. And it's what I call the zero draft. Like it doesn't even count is kind of how I look at it. And then after that, typically when you go back and you go to a rewrite or your, what would be considered now your first draft, you actually have an idea of how the story goes from start to finish. And you're just trying to plug in all the things that you're missing. That first chapter of that draft zero is usually just full of, let's get to know the characters in a very boring way. Like I can say for the novel that I'm writing, I cut my entire first chapter because there was a lot of like interesting things that I left in it. Like a lot of nuancy things of, that I was going to, bring back later down in the book. And then when I got to the second chapter, I was like, oh no, this is so much better. Like there's so much more going on here because there's action, there's dialogue, crazy things are happening. I was like, oh, I just need to cut this entire first chapter because I don't need it. Like it's slow. If I would have kept that chapter in, like nobody would read through it. Like nobody would read past that first chapter. Doesn't matter how good the prose is. Doesn't matter how good my diction is or my grammar or my voice. It was just a boring chapter. So it just gets cut. And I take whatever I was wanting to do with that first chapter, I pepper it out through the rest of the novel. So roping your reader in is like one of the most important things to learn. And it's one of the hardest things, in my opinion. Again, like I've been writing for a long time and it's only been recent that I've been taking this super serious. And it sticks out like a sore thumb when you read a book or a short story or something. And it's like, it's slogging through and you're like, why is this slogging? Like this is the first chapter. This is supposed to be great. Like this book is supposed to grip me. And why on earth would I, even if it's a big buzzy book, like a book that everybody's talking about, like everybody's waiting for it to be released because of whatever reason, like, again, there's so many books out there. There's so many stories out there. There's so many podcasts now. We've got all these audio dramas that have really kind of taken back up, there's too much entertainment for me to consume. And I'm going to be extremely picky and extremely choosy about what I watch, read, and listen to because I have finite time, like I've got 2 kids. I got a 1-year-old and a 4-year-old. I work 50 hours a week. I have a wife. I got bills. Like I've got other things. I like to drink. I'm a big drinker, which I think is, just par for the course. But like I got other things I want to do. And if you don't grip me within those first however many words or however many pages, like I'm just going to put it down. And you're either not going to get a rating for me or I'm not going to recommend your book to a friend or a family member when they're looking for something to read because, well, if I didn't get through it, then what makes you think that so-and-so is going to like it? So, okay, ramble over. So again, that first scene really grips me. So what I'm wanting to do is I want to take that exact scene, 2 people in a car, they're driving cross country. It's a tale as old as time. And then I want this, bam, I want this big event to happen. And I like the idea of it being another vehicle on the road. And then but all right, so what am I going to do differently with that? Because the horror aspect's already going to be there just because it's just the way it's set up, like a stranger comes driving up on them and then have to, they're being aggressive on the road and like tailgating them and then trying to run them off the road, that kind of thing. I kind of feel like I want it to be a motorcycle for some reason. All right, so that's going to be like halfway through it anyway. So let's bring out our bring out our list of names that I'm sure if the cops ever came by to see this, they would assume that this was some sort of hit list. Okay, let's go with Mike and Maya. They're brother and sister. Why not? Mike and Maya. What's Mike's last name? Ooh, no, Mike's last name's Tony. Mike Tony. Never trust a man with two first names. It's something my dad always told me. All right, Mike and Maya, let's put you in a car and on the road, baby. One thing I remember is the brother's name is played by Justin Long. His name in the movie is Derry. Like, Derry. What a dumb name.
You think he's dead?
They never are.
Jeepers Creepers.
Oh, I wonder if that's a reference to Derry and Stephen King's universe with like It and all that. Derry, Maine. I didn't even think about that till now. Huh. So I'm not too sure why I went with a Viking motorcyclist, but I did. I was envisioning a beard and a broadsword, which I don't even know if Vikings had broadswords, but I called him a Viking throughout the show. And for some reason, I also, throughout the short story, and I also, I made the sister pregnant, but she doesn't know that other people know, and the brother surely knows that she's pregnant. To try to build some sort of backstory, just to try to gauge an interesting dynamic, because that's a big deal, right? I mean, if you have a sibling and you know that sibling is either pregnant or their partner is pregnant and they're trying to keep it on the down low, you start to realize that there's certain things in their demeanor and the way that they proceed in the rest of their life is dictated by the fact that they are in fact pregnant. You know, so if you were on summer vacation and you thought, I'm going to have a kid in 8 months, maybe I won't go back to college? Because it could be crazy difficult to go back to college with a kid, especially if you don't have a family to support you and your partner's not supporting you, which I don't know if I really went into that. That's a thing. You know, that happens all the time. You know, like these decisions get made. These are very important, life-changing decisions that get made. And then, you know, suddenly your car is a monster. Who could imagine? Who could imagine that your car is a monster? And after I got finished writing it, I was like, oh, I could totally see them being like, all right, well, we have no car now. How are we going to get back out onto the road and to get to wherever we're supposed to be going? And he just has, you know, the Viking motorcyclist with his broadsword just happens to have an entourage of like 7 different cars riding behind him like Mad Max style, where they're like tricked out and weird looking. And they're like, all right, well, as long as you got gas money, like, come on up, you know, like, come join us. So, I mean, does it have potential? I mean, where these characters are stepping into a world that they don't know exists. They're being forced into this world and having to deal with it. And I would feel like the majority of people throughout the world would look at something like this and feel that they're intrigued by what's going on. So they want more information. So they would be more likely to ride with this group of strangers, not only just because they're abandoned in the desert, but because, I mean, how could a car be a monster? What are the implications of that? Is the car always a monster? Did the monster become the car? Did the monster infect a regular car to turn it into a transformer monster? From a writer's standpoint, the possibilities are truly endless. And then I do that thing that I always do, which is, oh, if this is something, what more can I do with it? And then I started thinking of like, okay, is this really only a flash fiction story? Is this a short story? Which I would put like right around like the 10 to 15, maybe 18,000 word story. Is this like part of a novella? Where usually with a novella, you can push the limit to like a 25,000 word, which is like a Goosebump book. You know, if you've read Goosebumps, those are books are about 20 to 25,000 words. to a novel, which I deem a novel somewhere between, 55 to 60 to 75,000 words. That's a novel. When I do that now, I don't know why I do it now, but when I do that now, I realize like, oh, well, I need something else going on in the story for me to elongate this piece to turn it into whatever it's supposed to be. And a lot of the time, I'm very hard pressed as to what, like, if I deem a story that it's only a short story, I can only get 10 to 12, maybe 15,000 words out of this, and that would be pushing it. I'm not going to sit down and try to figure out how do I turn this into a novel. I'm just going to write that short story. And then when I'm happy with it, I'm going to put it off to the side. I'm going to go work on something else. And then I'll either post that short story on my platform or somewhere else, or I might even hold back for it for maybe like a literary journal or, another publication that is looking for similar stories that I can get published on. Or I might even hold on to it even further and throw it into like a book of short stories and then release my own, sort of collection. I didn't really start doing that until recently, because one of those things that I honestly can't remember I even mentioned it on here, but I feel like I will never have a shortage of ideas. They may not be good ideas, they could be very bad ideas, but they're ideas all the same, and I feel like they're probably good enough that I took the time to write them down, so they got to be worth something. They got to be worth their salt somewhere, or I could work them into somewhere else. Oh, that's another thing that I do. Like sometimes I'll just come up with ideas of like situations, and I'll write those down and be like, I can use this in a story if I need a particular situation, or if I need a certain exchange between characters. I can put them in this scenario and see how it plays out. It doesn't, I'm not only writing just ideas for books, but I'm like writing down ideas for scenes, writing ideas down for character details. Like if I'm out and about and I overhear something interesting come out of a stranger's mouth, and I'm like, oh, that is unique. I've never heard anything like that before. I'm going to write that down in like a character details kind of notepad. And then as I'm going back and writing regular stuff, I'll sometimes go back to that dump file and be like, oh, the fact that this character always says in bed at the end of every fortune cookie fortune is very unique to this character. Like, oh, you will find the love of your life in the next 10 days in bed. Or that thing that you've been waiting for will finally be in your grasp in bed. Like, it's just dumb, quirky things that set your characters apart from each other, because a lot of the time I've realized that if you get too involved with what your character's doing, a lot of the time they all just start sounding the same, because they're all just reflections of you. And if you don't take the time to really separate the mannerisms and characteristics of a character to make them distinctive of each other, then everything just comes off sounding the same. And boy, can your readers see that stuff. Like I've even noticed that when I've read, like if I've beta read for a writer, and the writing can be fantastic and the prose can be so beautiful and the voice just pitch perfect, but both the mom and the daughter sound identical, even though one of them is 45 years old and the other one's 16. Like, yeah, they're related, but they are in such different parts of their life at the moment that there is no way that they would come to the same conclusion on politics. Like it's almost impossible. It's not impossible. It's just, it's not probable, I guess is what I'm trying to say. It's not impossible. It's just not probable. And having those little quirks that you just kind of come up with or overhear or evaluate in real life can come in handy to really just, the distinct of your characters from one another. So another little trick of the trade. But this thing's way too long. I can already guarantee. Oh yeah, this thing's 1359. So I've got to cut almost 400 words to get it under 1,000. And unfortunately, I already know what they're going to be. Like it's going to be some of that world building stuff, some of the character building stuff, because I threw in a couple extra things where I was just like, oh, this stuff is interesting, but it's not needed. And then the encounter can be cut down as well, because we go from in the introduction of the motorcycle Viking to the end of his arc, and it can be cut down. So let's see where we go with that. So yeah, again, these cuts were, I knew they were going to come up. I had to cut out a little bit of the character building, a little bit of the world building, had to cut out a little bit of the fight scene at the end. And then just bits and pieces going through Pro Writing Aid. I was able to correct a couple of like weird sentences, like saved a couple of words there, and then just, your basic. So for instance, there's a spot where, the Maya, the sister, she not only just looked out the window, but she crossed her arms and looked out the window, to show that what she's thinking, what she's going through right now. But since we got to be under 1,000 words, which this brings us to 989. A lot of that stuff just gets cut, because there's so much else that's going on. This is a very action-packed flash fiction, I feel like. There's a lot going on right now. So we want to focus on the action. We want to stay like high energy for the most part. But we also want to enjoy and make sure that the reader, knows who these characters are before these events happen. So I feel like we've done that. Again, this is one of those where I can kind of see it going somewhere, maybe not too far, but it's definitely down the road. Could definitely go down the road. I mean, this is what happens. Like, again, I literally took a scene from a movie that I enjoyed almost beat for beat and turned it into something that might be interesting to read later in life. Who knows? It's all about that inspiration. Whatever that inspiration is, man, just grab a hold of it and hang on, because it could take you places. So, yeah, that's it. We're going to be basic with this one. We're just going to call this one Spring Break. We're just going to call it Spring Break. Mike glanced over at his sister Maya, whose feet were still up on the dash. He jabbed her in the side. Maya winced and pulled back. "What the hell?" she asked. "Feet off the dash. Dad was very specific about that," Mike reminded her. "Well, Dad's not here," she said, gazing back out the window. A highway sign read 30 minutes to rest stop. The desert countryside rolled by. Except for the occasional billboard directing you to the nearest sex shop, the drive was boring. The radio moved from station to station. "Are you going back after spring break?" Mike asked. He did his best to keep his eyes on the road. Maya shrunk in her seat as best she could. She took a deep breath. "I don't know. I was thinking about taking some time off, trying to find myself and all that." Maya fumbled with her fingers in her lap. "Not sure if I want to be a psych major." Mike thumbed the steering wheel. Maya noticed his hesitation. "What?" she asked. Mike looked over at her, then back onto the road. He peered into the rearview mirror and noticed a glimmer of sunlight off something shiny. "What about the baby?" he asked, looking over at her. When their eyes met, she instantly turned away and looked back at the window. She wiped a stray tear from her cheek. "How did you know?" she asked. "Easy to figure out. Haven't seen you drinking beer in the past 2 days. Boobs are bigger. Plus Johnny's got a big mouth," Mike explained. "Johnny needs to learn to stay out of other people's business," she said. Mike looked into the rearview mirror again. What he thought was a car was actually a motorcycle, and the rider was a cosplayer of a bearded, futuristic Viking, complete with leather jacket and ripped jeans, and he was booking it. "How far along are you?" he asked. "I don't know. A few weeks." "Did you take a test?" "Yes, Michael." "And?" He was growing frustrated. "And what? It was positive." "So was the one after that. And the one after that." Suddenly, something hard hit the driver's side window. Mike's reflexes went into overdrive. The car swerved, riding the warning track, and Mike overcorrected to keep the car on the road. Maya tensed up in her seat. "What the fuck?" she shouted, and twisted in her seat to look behind her. The motorcycle fell back behind them, seeming to gain control as well, then sped up to Mike's window again. The Viking motorcyclist punched the window, this time causing it to crack. "Pull over!" Maya screamed. "He's going to kill us if we do that. Just hold on." Mike gripped the wheel and jerked it into the motorcycle. The Viking pulled his weight to the side, avoiding the collision. He twisted in his seat and threw his arm out. The back tire blew, forcing Mike to white-knuckle the steering wheel. "Hold on," he shouted as Maya held herself in place. Mike checked his mirrors and took his foot off the gas, easing the car into the desert. Dirt flung up from all over him as the car came to a slow stop. He unbuckled his seat and opened the door. "Hey," Maya protested. "He's going to kill you." Maya's pleas were a distant echo to the blood-pumping, adrenaline-fueled Mike. The Viking pulled his motorcycle to a sharp stop and hopped off. This is the first time that Mike had noticed the giant sword that was strapped to his back. In a single motion, the Viking pulled the sword out and brandished it in front of him. It was almost as long as he was, Mike noticed, before backing up. "Hey man, we don't want no trouble," Mike explained. The Viking raised the sword over his head and brought it down with all of his might onto the car. Instead of a clinging of metal on metal, the car groaned. Mike looked at the car, then back at the Viking's stoic face. Mike turned to the broken window on the passenger door at Maya. "Get out of the car, now!" Maya fumbled with the door handle as the Viking gave the car another crushing blow from his broadsword. The car groaned again. This time it lurched forward and moved a few feet. Maya stumbled out of the car and distanced herself. The Viking came down again with the sword, tip first, and the car screamed a chorus of voices that dropped Mike to the ground. The car turned to face the Viking, shifted and moved to stand on its hind wheels. The windshield no longer glass, but an evil pair of eyes. The headlights flashed on and off as the engine revved. The Viking moved, but held his ground as the car spun its wheels. Mike shuffled back on the ground, fearing the worst. He had lost sight of his sister, but he couldn't take his eyes off the new car-turned monster that was biting at the Viking. The car charged forward, hood open like a mouth full of metal teeth, but found the tip of the Viking's blade. The Viking stepped forward, pushing the broadsword deeper with a grunt. The car roared of engine sounds and unworldly screaming before rearing back and falling to its side. The dust settled and no one moved. Mike could hear the crackle of the heat rising from the ground. The exhaust farted out one last burst of smoke before relaxing. The Viking stepped forward. "Where did you get this car?" he said, pointing at the dead monster. Mike shuffled a bit up to his feet before falling back to the ground. "Where?" he shouted. "It's a rental." Mike's voice trembled out of him. He failed to compose himself, clearing his throat. "It's a rental." And there you have it. Just a nice little spring break drive cross country with a Viking motorcyclist in a car that ends up being a monster. It's so dumb. It's so funny and it's weird. And man, I can just imagine a convoy of, Mad Max style, just coming up right behind him over the horizon. And now we're into a story. Like, how fun is that? Because now it can take you anywhere. But I want you to take me somewhere. I want to read your flash fiction. Email it to me, hello@ericmhunter.net, or you can tag me on Twitter with your story links @flashfiction4. Let's get more entertainment out there for the ears. Let's let the people enjoy it. And until next time.